Greetings and welcome. We are in senior AP English, and our objective for the hour now is to work with W.H. Auden's poetry. I want to make a couple of comments about Auden that are just kind of general in nature, and then I want to go specifically to the Musée des Beaux-Arts, the classic poem that introduces in many ways this really sardonic view of the universe. Auden, playing the same game as Eliot, will see something darkly wrong with the modern era. In a word, he will see it as, we talked about it last year in our junior offering with Frost, he will see it in a word as alienation. The idea that for some reason we don't seem to be able to connect so well with each other. Now, the way a genius poetic mind works, follow this is really cool to me. There's a picture on page 1153. That picture doesn't mean a lot to you at first, but then I will ask you about this picture, which is a very famous painting. I will ask you two things that you want to put into your notes. One, what's the name of this painting? And two, who is the author of this painting? So write both of those down because they're going to obviously factor. Yes? Okay? So who is the creator of this work of art? And what is the name of this work of art? And then finally, if you know anything about Icarus, can you see anything relational in regards to Icarus in this painting? Okay, and then from there we'll talk about the genius of Auden and the way he uses this image to talk about postmodern, pre-postmodern, and postmodern isolationism, alienation. Okay, Annie, how'd you do on the? Got it. All right, so the title of the text is what? What's it called? No, the image itself on 1153. It's called The Fall of Icarus, right? Now, who is Icarus, and why should I care? Do you remember? Daedalus's boy. Remember, they get stuck in that situation where they are going to escape by flying away. Daedalus, the father, right? We call them dads today, don't we? For gee, I wonder why. Daedalus, the father, will say to his son Icarus, here's the deal. The wings are going to work, but you got to listen to me and obey all the rules. To which, of course, yeah, we're familiar with stupid young kids. Yeah, give me the wings. The wings go on. Off he flies. What do you know? They work. Icarus is finding so much joy flying higher and higher. He flies too close to the sun. Of course, the wax that holds the feathers together melt, and of course he falls into the ocean and dies. A somewhat tragic ending. Maybe Greeks invented this story to suggest to all of the young, young Platos and the like, you should listen to your parents or you end up falling dead into the water. With that in mind, however, look at how Virgil kind of plays the game of the fall of Icarus. Could you, A, find Icarus? Can you point to Icarus in the painting? Okay? Can you point to Icarus in the painting? And what do you find kind of interesting about it? I'll give you a hint. No, Icarus is not the guy behind the plow. Okay, that's not Icarus. So where is Icarus? Yes, you can see him. Do you see him? Some of you will report that without help, you couldn't find him. And the only part of him you can find, you're right. All you can find of him are his little legs, of course, about to go under the water. We should point out that Virgil just paints this painting. And it sits in a famous museum, the Museum of Beautiful Art, and Auden goes and looks at this painting. Once he looks at this painting, he comes back and he sits down, as poets will, and he writes a famous poem about this painting. But the way he gets there is quite remarkable. Sophisticated, we might even say. Let's take a look at this notice it intentionally, I'm pointing it out at 2B. This is a 2-stanza poem. Do you see it? And we want to identify the break. Let's read now together the poem. By the way, if you don't know this painting, pretty much this poem makes absolutely no sense. So for those of you who are trying to read this thing in advance, you're like, I have no idea what this one is about. Well, that's because you have to know Virgil's piece. Let's take a look at it now. Musée des Beaux-Arts. About suffering, they were never wrong, the old masters. How well they understood its human position. How it takes place while someone else is eating or opening a window or just walking duly along. How, when the aged are reverentially, passionately waiting for the miraculous birth, There always must be children who do not specially want it to happen, skating on a pond at the edge of the wood. They never forgot that even the dreadful martyrdom must run its course, anyhow, in a corner, some untidy spot where the dogs go on with their doggy life and the torturer's horse scratches its innocent behind on a tree. In Virgil's Icarus, for instance, how everything turns away, quite leisurely, from the disaster. The plowman may have heard the splash, the forsaken cry, but for him it was not an important failure. The sun shone as it had on the white legs disappearing into the green water, and the expensive, delicate ship that must have seen something amazing, a buoy falling out of the sky, had somewhere to get to and sailed calmly on. Now, again, this is a poem which is going to reward a closer bit of inspection. Notice again how he begins. He goes back to the ancients, and he says something about Plato, and he says something about the ancients. Notice how he begins, about suffering. And right away, because you're AP students, you should be able to do this in your annotations. You should be able to write down that word that is the famous word that talks about suffering and human suffering in the condition of the universe. What is that question, and how do we pose it? I'll give you a hint. Milton wrote an entire poem called Paradise Lost to try to answer the, what is it called? Do I have anyone in here that knows this word now? I'll give you a hint.
Theodicy.
Well done, Mr. Sherman. The Theodicy Question. What is the Theodicy Question? Mr. Schreiber just blinks his eyes and says, I could have thought of it if I'd had an eternity. What is the Theodicy Question? Remember, the Theodicy Question is, the question of theodicy, is the way that you can explain the fact that in a world supposedly created by an all-powerful, all-loving deity, you have really bad stuff that happens, dare we call it suffering, right? The Theodicy Question is one of the oldest questions in the history of the world. Many argue it's the reason for formulations of religion. Many argue it's the reason for formulations of atheism. In other words, if there's a knockdown argument against the existence of an all-powerful, all-loving deity, it is a child who dies of leukemia. Many argue, no, Milton being one of them, the child dying of leukemia has nothing to do with God. It has everything to do with free will or agency. And of course, if you're going to give humans the right to choose, often humans will choose badly, and in so doing, you have leukemia. You see, this is the answers on both sides of the street. The Theodicy Question, however, continues or remains to be one of import. However, in the 20th century, Auden will point out that the question about suffering, it's a really interesting thing about suffering and about what the old people had to say about it. Now see, we can come back to the poem. Some of you are saying, reading these poems is like kind of peeling an onion. We keep going to layers to be a little Shrek on you this morning. Yes, of course you can parfait if you wish. The old masters, how well they understood its human position. What human position? The human position of what? Of suffering, yeah. Notice how it what? Suffering. How suffering takes place while someone else is eating or opening a window or just walking duly along. How when the aged are reverentially, passionately waiting for the miraculous birth, there must be children who didn't specifically want it to happen, skating on a pond at the edge of the wood. Well, to this point, what is it said about suffering? Suffering is very interesting. People can be in tremendous pain, and what about everybody else? Yeah, sucks to be you. Really glad it didn't happen to me. Really kind of happy it happened to you instead of to me. Sucks to be you. The ancients, in other words, he says, the old masters, pointed out something about suffering. It only matters when what?
It's you.
It only matters when it's your own suffering. When it's somebody else's suffering, what an interesting view. He keeps going. The old masters, they never forgot that even the dreadful martyrdom must run its course. To understand this word picture, you have to understand that one of the ways that the church and other institutions liked to keep people in line, no pun intended, was to tie strong ropes to 4 body parts, 2 arms, 2 legs, and then tie one end of the human being to like a tree, and then the other part of the human being to a horse, to the back end of a horse. And then all they did was just simply whip the horse's behind, and in the process of your back straightening, and then of course beyond. You can't appreciate this word picture, which is a dark word picture, unless you understand this was a primary form of torture when you were basically just pulled apart. Your arms and your legs were pulled first out of their sockets and then completely came off. And in the process, of course, you died an excruciating, dare we say it, a painful death. Here we go now, that even in the dreadful martyrdom, to die, for example, for some cause, must run its course anyhow in a corner, some untidy spot where the dogs go on with their doggy life and the torturer's horse scratches its innocent behind on a tree. Stanza break. Well, already, let's point out the tone of this poem. What is the tone of this poem? Auden, how would you call it? It is a morbid tone. Auden, however, is kind of an academic, isn't he? And so he likes to kind of work from the philosophic premise. He could have just as easily said about Theodicy, they were never wrong. And that would have probably been just a little over the top. Do you know what I'm saying? So he uses the word suffering. And yet he immediately jumps into the whole philosophic notion, dare we say it, the Stoic notion, from Marcus Aurelius and others, right? Epictetus comes to mind. The idea that people suffer, that is true. Bad things happen to people. Their arms and legs, for example, get pulled off because they claim some belief in a deity or whatever, and that's their martyrdom. But about all of that, other human beings have a tendency to, how would you say it? Just not care. Totally ignore it. It's like, dude, sucks to be them. I don't know, somebody got their arms pulled off today. Oh well, sucks to be them. And notice the adjective of the horse. Did you see it? The innocent horse. Did you see it? So, for example, the horse isn't maligned because it pulls somebody in two. The horsey just does what horsies do. When they get spanked on the butt, they go faster, and to that degree, somebody's arms and legs get yanked off. The horse isn't at fault. It's an innocent horse, and he, after he does his terrible thing, he just starts eating. That's all the horsey does. Stanza break. Now, this poem could have been dark enough if he had stopped there. But the reason he wrote the poem is not Theodicy. The reason he wrote the poem is the painting on 1153. Burgle's painting is why he wrote this poem. And I want to point out, since I'm going to be lecturing tomorrow about Joyce and the whole notion of the artist anyway, I want to point out the strange way that artists and poets will find contiguity when sometimes nobody else would. So, for example, Burgle just painted a painting, which was a famous story from Greek mythology about the fall of Icarus out of the sky. He puts a ship there. He puts a guy plowing there. He puts these little legs falling out of the sky there. You know what I'm saying? I mean, that's the painting. It's a famous painting. And there it is. Auden looks at the painting, and he immediately adduces a certain understanding of his world that's going to sound very similar to the world of T.S. Eliot's "We are the hollow men, we are the stuffed men, leaning together, headpiece filled with straw." Look what he says now in the second stanza. In Burgle's Icarus, for instance, in other words, here's my POV. Nobody cares about other people's suffering. Here's my point of validation to prove it. In Burgle's Icarus, a painting, by the way, that Auden, noticed just like T.S. Eliot, assumes you know. When he publishes this poem, he doesn't put the little picture next to it. Got me? In other words, like T.S. Eliot, who will quote, for example, Baudelaire's famous poem to the reader, "You hypocrite lecteur, me semble mon frère." He'll quote those final lines, never even referencing the poem or Baudelaire. T.S. Eliot playing a game of assuming that the reader is enlightened enough to already know what we're talking about. And if you're too stupid to know who Burgle is and what the fall of Icarus is, then you don't deserve his respect to be reading his poem in the first place. Do you already get the sense? In other words, he's going to play a game with you, the reader, to kind of say, I'll point out just how insignificantly, we think about the works of modern and early ancient art. Here it comes. For example, he says, for instance, Burgle's Icarus. How everything, see the colon, how everything turns away quite leisurely from the disaster. And there were a number of readers who, because they loved Auden, they read this poem, they were like, And they didn't have the advantage of Google. So they couldn't immediately Google Fall of Icarus and then go to the images section of Google and then see this photograph. Or in your case, in your book, it's provided for you. Although a goodly number of you maybe would have read this poem and never even looked at the picture. Why? Because the assignment is to read the poem, not to look at the stupid pictures in the book. And to that degree, why would I look at the pictures? Some of you looked at the picture and you still didn't see Icarus, even though you were told it was called the Fall of Icarus. Of course, for some of you, you had to be reminded who Icarus even was. And then once you heard the story, then, oh yeah, there's some legs sticking out of the water. Oh, that's kind of cool. But notice in the moment, oh yeah, that's kind of cool, you're playing the game already that he's talking about. Dude, somebody's drowning in this painting. Icarus dies. He drowns to death. That's the story. And in that moment, Auden's got you. Right? Almost none of you looked at this picture and went, oh, we're watching someone die. We're watching someone drown to death. That is not how you responded to this painting. It's not the way most anyone responds to the painting. Hello, are you ready for this? It ain't even the way the people in the painting respond to the drowning of Icarus. Look at the plow guy. The plowman, he's not even looking over his shoulder. It's like, dude, somebody fell out of the sky, probably screaming all the way to the water. He didn't even look around. He was too busy doing what? He was plowing. Or the ship. Well, this is where Auden takes his inspiration. So now we'll read the stanza. In Virgil's Icarus, for instance, how everything turns away quite leisurely from the disaster. Notice the kind of que sera sera tone of the poem. The plowman may have heard the splash, the forsaken cry, but for him it was not an important failure. Notice the emphasis on for him. The sun shone as it had on the white legs disappearing into the green water, and the expensive, delicate ship that must have seen something amazing, a boy falling out of the sky, had somewhere to get to, and sailed calmly on. What do you make of the adverb calmly? Sailed calmly on.
Didn't. No, that's fine.
What does he say about this ship? He says it's what? Two things. Did you see it? You got to pay close attention when you're reading good poets. What does he say about this ship?
That he needs to get somewhere.
It's delicate.
It's delicate.
Expensive.
And it's expensive. Which seems to suggest the ship is going where? Doing what? Is it out on a pleasure cruise? Is that what it's all about? No. What's that ship all about? It's right. It's all about making currency. In other words, the ship has a place to go to make $1. It doesn't have time to help rescue a boy who's just fallen out of the sky and is drowning to death right next to the boat. It's too busy sailing, and so it's already leaving. Out of this painting, Auden is able to then make a statement about modern to some degree modern culture, but we will call it today postmodern culture. What is that statement? Notice he just calls it the Museum of Beautiful Arts, which, by the way, is the museum where he sees Virgil's Icarus. That's where he sees the painting. What's ironic about the title now? And what point is he making about human society? And some of you will say, well, that is very disturbing. Is it possible that you would actually be in a situation where you're seeing someone drowning and you would be like, talk about how technology, and to some degree Auden was already predicting this, talk about the ways in which technology has to some degree made it impossible for us to really have much empathy for other people's pain. Is that possible? How has that happened, do you think? That nasty New Yorker cartoon that said they're walking away, two guys walking away from the television, and he said, "Man, all those commercials about starving kids in Africa has made me hungry. Let's go get a pizza." It's a joke. It's satire, right? What is the point that this poem seems to suggest about human beings and pain? What do you think? And what's his view of human nature? What is he saying?
That we're all selfish,
To what degree selfish?
to where we don't care enough to help other people.
We don't care in the same way that what? Back to Virgil's painting. The plowman's busy. I got something to do. I do not have time to screw with your pain. I know you've got pain. Really sorry for you. But guess what? We all have pain, right? We all have pain. And off he goes. The ship. I've got to go make some I gotta go make some bank. I don't have time. I don't have time to deal with you and you're drowning. Sorry about that. Obviously sucks to be you, and probably you deserved it anyway. Which is ironic because what do we say about Icarus and his drowning? He did deserve it anyway. Why does Icarus deserve drowning? According to the myth, he refused to listen to the monuments of an aging intellect. Ah, yeah. See, now we're back to the same game again, aren't we? But wait a minute. Do you think it's true? Do you think it's actually true that human beings really don't care about other human beings' pain? What do you think? Schreiber, what do you think on this topic? It's like, it sucks to be them. Do you think it's true human beings do not care about other human beings' pain?
Depends on who it is.
Meaning what? The person in pain or the person witnessing the pain?
The person, like, if it's someone, like, that's really close to you, you'll probably feel bad for them, I guess.
Where did we already see some of these gesturings in Tennyson's poem, The Lady of Shalott? Do you remember?
Yeah, she's just floating there.
She drowns, or she dies at the end of the poem, and the only thing Lancelot can say is, yeah, she's hot. I would have liked to have known her. Too bad she died. What do you think, Kelleher? Are human beings hardwired to really, in the end, only care about their own existence? I mean, it sounds mean to say it, sounds unsettling, but is that actually the human condition?
I don't think so.
Really? You have an argument to be made that could prove otherwise to Auden? And if so, what is that argument?
I don't know. I just like, maybe not all people, but I think that there'd be some sort of confidence in people to like have like a sense of wanting to protect people that they're close to.
See, we have a sense of that, right? But notice Mr. Kelleher got all the way to the end and then said, people that we're close to. Yeah, that's true. The people we know and the people with whom we identify, we have a tendency to kind of want to protect. So, for example, if you're with your pal and somebody starts picking on your pal, you have a tendency to step up and go knock it off. Because, as Mr. Keller points out, this is somebody you know and identify with whom you share some common bond. But in Icarus, the fall of Icarus, the plowman doesn't know this cat. Come back tomorrow. We'll do some more.